Welcome to the podcast summary of Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh's story usually gets flattened into the same few images: the severed ear, the lonely genius, the tragic end. But when you look at the paintings, the letters, and the people around him, a more interesting picture shows up. An artist who worked with fierce purpose, depended deeply on his brother Theo, and kept turning ordinary fields, workers, and night skies into something spiritually charged and completely new. And the strange thing is, the myth made him famous while also hiding a lot of what actually made him great. Van Gogh made about 2,100 artworks, including roughly 860 oil paintings, and most of that came in just the last 2 years of his life. That matters because it pushes back on the easy idea that illness simply stopped him from working. His life was unstable. Yes, but his late output was astonishingly intense and disciplined. You can see the transformation in the work itself. He starts in dark earth tones, painting peasants and still lifes, and then gradually arrives at that unmistakable language of hot complementary colors, thick paint, and brushwork that feels almost electrically alive. Color for him wasn't just descriptive. Yellow could mean sunlight, life, even God. A cypress tree could be more than a tree. A sower could be a farm worker and also a spiritual figure, someone scattering life into the world. By the time you get to the starry night, he's still looking at a landscape, but he's also turning it into a vision of inner feeling and cosmic motion. It's observation, but transformed until it almost hums. A huge amount of what we know about Van Gogh comes from his letters, especially the more than 600 he wrote to Theo. They're incredibly intimate, almost like a running studio diary. He writes about color, composition, money, doubt, ambition, and what he's trying to do from one painting to the next. Theo wasn't just a supportive brother in the background. He gave Vincent sustained financial help, emotional support, access to artistic networks, and he preserved the correspondence that now shapes how we understand him. So the image of Van Gogh as a totally isolated genius doesn't really hold up. His career rested on a long family partnership, even if Theo couldn't make the work commercially successful while Vincent was alive. The letters also show something else. People sometimes miss. Van Gogh was strategic. He thought in series, made related works for display and exchange, revised ideas, and imagined future recognition. This wasn't just raw feeling splashed onto canvas. There was planning there, and a real sense of building an oeuvre. Before painting took over his life, Van Gogh had been a Protestant missionary in Belgium, and he threw himself into that role so completely that he lived in extreme solidarity with poor miners, giving away comfortable lodging and sleeping on straw. That religious intensity never really disappeared. It got rerouted into art. His early commitment to working people stayed with him in paintings like the Potato Eaters and in those repeated images of sowers, harvesters, and fields. Labor becomes both a social reality and a spiritual allegory. He was drawn to ordinary rural life as a place of dignity, sacrifice, and transcendence, which is a very Van Gogh combination: muddy boots, eternal meaning. That also helps explain why he pushed back against academic rules. At the Antwerp Academy, when asked for an idealized Venus, he drew a peasant woman's body instead. He preferred lived reality over polished convention. Arles was the great concentrated burst. He made about 200 paintings there, plus more than 100 drawings and watercolors. The southern light opened everything up: bright yellows, ultramarines, mauves, those colors that now feel inseparable from his mature style. He also wasn't imagining Arles as a private retreat. The Yellow House was supposed to become the center of an artist collective. He prepared for Gauguin's arrival with decorative series, including the sunflowers, chairs, and bedrooms, which makes the project feel almost touching in retrospect. He wasn't just decorating a room. He was staging a shared artistic future. But the collaboration collapsed under pressure. Van Gogh admired Gauguin and wanted an equal partnership, while Gauguin comes across as more domineering. Their tensions built, the relationship broke apart. And this is the crisis that fed directly into the ear incident and Gauguin's departure. So even one of the most famous breakdowns in art history sits inside a failed social dream, not just solitary instability. Van Gogh did experience serious mental and physical suffering, psychotic episodes, delusions, depression, poor nutrition, heavy drinking, smoking, insomnia. None of that should be softened. But the diagnosis is not settled, and probably never will be. People have proposed bipolar disorder, temporal lobe epilepsy, acute intermittent porphyria, and the honest answer is that retrospective certainty just isn't possible. The ear story is murkier than the legend too. Gauguin's account isn't corroborated. The sequence of events is disputed, and even the extent of the injury is debated. His final suicide has also been absorbed into the romantic script of the doomed artist. He survived for around 2 days after the shooting, and even basic details, like whether it happened in a wheat field or a barn, remain uncertain. Then there are those reported last words, "The sadness will last forever," which have enormous myth-making power, even if they reduce a very complicated life to one dark line. The same thing happens with the idea that he was completely unrecognized while alive. That's too simple. He exhibited in Brussels and Paris, got praise from critics like Albert Aurier, was invited by Les Execs, and Monet reportedly thought his work was the best thing in an 1890 exhibition. He wasn't a success in the market, but he also wasn't invisible. The bigger transformation came after his death, especially through Jo van Gogh, Theo's widow. She inherited an estate, many people treated as nearly worthless, and then spent years promoting the paintings and the letters. When the letters were published in 1914, they helped cement that enduring image of Van Gogh as the intense, suffering genius. That story was powerful, maybe too powerful. It linked madness, creativity, and early death so tightly that it sometimes overshadowed his technical discipline, his ambitions, and his relationships. Even so, later artists absolutely took from him, and not just from the biography. Matisse, the Fauves, German Expressionists, Francis Bacon, they responded to the formal innovations too. The color, the distortion, the emotional charge carried by paint itself. His posthumous fame became artistic, commercial, and frankly enormous. Works like Portrait of Dr. Gachet, Portrait of Joseph Roulin, and Irises later sold for sums that would be well over $100 million in today's terms, which is a wild contrast with Theo's inability to establish a market for them during Vincent's lifetime. The Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, opened in 1973, became one of the Netherlands' most visited museums. In 2015, it drew 1.9 million visitors, and 85% came from abroad. At that point, you're not just talking about art history. You're talking about tourism, national identity, and a major cultural economy built around a man who once struggled to sell his work at all. His paintings also keep landing in present-day political and ethical fights. Nazi-looted Van Goghs still generate provenance disputes. And the 2022 tomato soup protest aimed at sunflowers showed how his work functions as a globally legible symbol in activism, even though that painting was protected by glass and wasn't damaged. So Van Gogh's life wasn't just a tragedy with brilliant colors attached to it. It was a life of work, theory, partnership, faith, conflict, ambition, and a very determined attempt to make painting carry more feeling, more meaning, and more human weight than it had before. The myth is memorable, sure. The real story is a lot fuller, and honestly, a lot more worth staying with. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.